We have with us Frank Tietie, who is a legal practitioner. Now, we understand that about 30...
Over 30.
Over 30 resident electoral commissioners have not been appointed to INEC. Why should we be worried?
Well, I think we're worried because you couldn't have ever imagined that we would be without one resident electoral commissioner for a state for one day. Is that important? And because it's inexplicable that as of 2015, when this government came on board, at June 2015 to be specific, when 16 resident electoral commissioners were leaving, there ought not to be any vacuum whatsoever for 24 hours. There ought to have been a prepared list of replacement. So it's inexplicable, and the only reason that one can only fathom why there isn't this appointment can only be Sinister. Because you can only imagine that it's another ploy, it's one grand scheme to actually subvert democracy. And it's worrisome. In fact, we are currently in a state of emergency regarding our democracy. We're talking about 34 out of 37 resident electoral commissioners for 2 years thereabout. The president has refused to appoint, contrary to the express provision of the Constitution. This is dangerous for democracy. Very dangerous.
Why do you believe it's dangerous for democracy? You say that we shouldn't have had that vacancy for even 24 hours.
Certainly.
Why?
Let's get something clear. Democracy, it's about two things: the right to free speech, and then the right to choose, the right to vote, the right to choose your leaders. And that is what is at stake when elections lack credibility. Now, Section 6, subsection 2, paragraph A of the Electoral Act states that the resident electoral commissioner shall be answerable to the commission. There is a specific responsibility for a resident electoral commissioner. That is, he shall take responsibility for the proper conduct of an election to which INEC will be held responsible or accountable. Now, you don't leave that, that responsibility in the hands of ordinary civil servants you call administrative officers. Now you give it to a man who has, according to the Constitution, must have integrity, and then must be competent, and then he would have to be to show that the elections are credible. Now, he needs time to even understand his job. He needs time to deliver on his job. But as we speak, these persons we don't know these persons, and we don't have persons responsible for the position, for the responsibility of the resident electoral commissioner. That's dangerous.
We don't have them in acting capacity?
What we have in acting capacity are mere civil servants who don't have any responsibility. Do you know what it means?
So they cannot be held responsible?
Certainly not. Certainly not, because if you look at the Public Protection, the Protection of Public Officers Act, they are immune a lot from a lot of things. Now, there was sense. It wasn't a whimsical idea on the part of the Constitution to expressly say that there shall be 12 commissioners, 12 national commissioners, and then for each state a resident electoral commissioner.
I find it a little curious that you say that this is a sinister plot to subvert democracy, because this same allegation was made when the positions of national commissioners were not complete.
No. First and foremost, there is clear dereliction of duty on the part of the person who occupies the position of a president. For goodness sake, is it rocket science to make appointments? When the Constitution even guides you, let the person be not less than 35 years, and let it be somebody that has integrity. In the previous election we've had, the last government appointed a trade unionist. Jega wasn't just a lecturer, he was a trade unionist. And other persons that were appointed were drawn out from the civil society, men of integrity. We are not in shortage of them. The president cannot say that there is one unusual scrutiny he has to conduct for nearly 2 years before he finds credible Nigerians to occupy the positions of resident electoral commissioners. So would you blame any political party? Would you blame any ordinary citizen if he believes that there is a grand scheme beyond his imagination and he's just watching? And look, I said it's dangerous. Why is it dangerous?
Don't you think it's a little odd for us? I mean, it's a little nearly bordering on conspiracy theory that we're bringing up these theories when there is actually no basis for them.
How do you imagine such a thing.
Because how does this
me.
put democracy under threat?
No. We just watched the commentary on Rivers election and how brutal it was. How the number of deaths unconfirmed number of deaths, because
there was a resident electoral commission.
Oh yes, there was electoral. Let me tell you something. When the perception about the electoral process is doubtful,
that will
now puts democracy at risk. And now, let me tell you that.
Mr.
And that's
Tete,
yes.
Mr. Tete, that would happen whether or not there is a resident electoral commissioner.
Let me tell you this. When you have a resident electoral commissioner in place, what you get is that a man who has sufficient time to master his responsibility, he takes responsibility for it, and then the commission holds him accountable. In that regard, you would not wonder why we had a lot of inconclusive elections when this new INEC regime began, because they hadn't mastered the game. Now, why would you deprive, for goodness sake, supply me just one reason why the Constitution says appoint regs for each of the states, and you refuse to do that for 1 year and then for 2 years, and then there is no hope in sight that you even want to do that, and you don't think that there's a state of emergency? And you ask me that I'm being a conspiracy theorist? On what basis? Why shouldn't we cry wolf, so that there can be compliance to the simple expressions of the Constitution?
You know, Mr. Tete, I asked you, first of all, I began by asking you why we should be concerned. You told us that because, INEC resident electoral commissioners are held responsible by INEC. And even, I think, if they go to the courts, they will also be held responsible. Is that right?
Certainly not. It's INEC that will be held responsible. Okay. That's why they are made
to hold the residents
to be answerable directly to the commission.
Now,
that's what the law says.
You gave an instance of Rivers State.
Yes.
And we pointed out that Rivers State does have right now a resident. In fact, it's one of the few states.
The only 3 states.
Exactly. That has a resident.
No, interestingly.
Just a moment. Yes. It's one of the few states that has a resident electoral commissioner. And the resident electoral commissioner has been there for quite a while.
Yes.
So how does that show, that the lack of a resident electoral commissioner would result, for instance, in inconclusive elections? When Rivers, that you point to as the example, has had a resident electoral commissioner for months?
That because despite the presence of a resident electoral commissioner that has been directed by the Constitution, and there have been violence and other, electoral malpractices, and then that becomes a justification for disobeying the Constitution, you don't imagine that it's an impeachable offense for the president to directly and flagrantly decide not to obey and comply with the provision of the Constitution? We are talking about legal compliance here. So why should we have an aberration? Why should we make it a norm that we will go for 2 years without obeying the law? Now,
so perhaps
now see this. It becomes an anomaly. And the ordinary political watcher begins to say, wait, this must be a plot. I don't know. If they accuse him of being a conspiracy theorist, he's entitled. Because he'll begin to figure out, for goodness sake, and I tell you, and I tell anybody, give me one reason why the president just can, in 7 days, appoint resident electoral commissioners for 34 states of Nigeria. Why?
So perhaps the ordinary political watcher can do that, but are you an ordinary political watcher?
Well, I'm a citizen of this country, and then I'm a lawyer by training, and I understand that it is dereliction, absolute dereliction of duty on the part of the president, for him to refuse to appoint, to fail to appoint, thereby casting doubt in the electoral process. Let me tell you, there is nothing that threatens the peace and order of a polity than when the people perceive that their electoral power, their fundamental power that is resident in the voter card, is being shortchanged. Now, people take laws into their hands. People must have that ordinary perception that there is compliance to law. And that's what, stabilizes the polity. That is what is being threatened. There is no reason why we should throw the polity into this unnecessary debacle